Los Angeles' Silverwood Grill was one of the city's most prestigious restaurants, a place where Hollywood's elite, tech billionaires, and social media influencers gathered under crystal chandeliers to enjoy the finest dining experience. This was not just a restaurant, it was a status symbol. To be seen here meant you had power, influence, and wealth. But that night, one man walked in who didn't fit the mold. Clint Eastwood entered wearing a simple brown jacket, old jeans, and worn-out boots. His presence didn't turn heads. No cameras flashed. No one whispered his name. To the waitstaff, he was just another unremarkable guest, certainly not someone worthy of VIP treatment. At the front, Jessica, the restaurant's ambitious head waitress, noticed him immediately. Jessica prided herself on perfection. She ran the dining room with a sharp eye, ensuring that every guest matched the restaurant's high standards. That night, an Oscar-winning actor, a few venture capitalists, and an Instagram influencer with millions of followers were dining. Keeping them happy was her top priority. And then she saw him. A man in dusty boots and an outdated jacket, sitting at one of the best tables, sipping a glass of whiskey as if he belonged. She was livid. Jessica stormed over, putting on her most practiced, professional smile, the kind that barely masked her disapproval. "Good evening, sir," she said, her tone carefully measured. "I couldn't help but notice that you've been sitting here for quite some time with just a single drink. Are you waiting for someone?" Clint looked up slowly, his piercing gaze meeting hers with calm amusement. "Nope. Just enjoying my drink." Jessica's smile tightened. "Sir, this table is usually reserved for our VIP guests, people who have booked well in advance. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the bar?" A young busboy named Miguel, who had immigrated from Mexico 2 years ago and had worked tirelessly to support his family, overheard the conversation. He knew exactly who Clint Eastwood was. Growing up, he had watched Clint's Western films with his father. His hands clenched into fists. Jessica, oblivious to the tension, continued. "You see, Silverwood Grill is known for a certain level of clientele, and we have a very exclusive menu. The prices reflect the caliber of our experience." At a nearby table, an older couple, longtime patrons of the restaurant, shifted uncomfortably. The husband opened his mouth to say something, but his wife placed a hand on his arm. She recognized the look in Clint's eyes, the same steely, quiet resolve that had made him a legend on the big screen. Clint placed his glass down slowly, his movements deliberate. "I'm well aware of the prices." Jessica hesitated, sensing for the first time that something was off. "Then, shall I explain our menu?" "Slowly, perhaps," she added, a subtle jab at his age. That was the moment Miguel couldn't stay silent anymore. "Miss Jessica, maybe we should get the manager," he said quietly. Jessica's eyes snapped toward him. "Stay out of this, Miguel. Go bus tables, that's what you're here for." Clint's gaze flicked between the two, a spark of amusement in his eyes. He had faced down ruthless Hollywood executives, critics, and even politicians in his career. But this was something else entirely. Jessica sighed dramatically. "Sir, one last time, this isn't some roadside diner where just anyone can wander in. This is Silverwood Grill, a place of modern luxury. Maybe in your day, things were different, but we have standards now." Clint took another slow sip of his whiskey, letting her words settle in the air before responding. "My day?" he repeated, his tone quiet yet firm. Jessica folded her arms. "Yes, your day. When people could just walk into places, dress however they wanted, and expect special treatment. But times have changed." At that moment, Miguel, the older couple, and even some of the younger staff realized that Jessica had just made the biggest mistake of her career. Clint Eastwood leaned back in his chair, that legendary half-smirk forming at the corner of his mouth. "Times may have changed," he said, "but respect, that never goes out of style." The restaurant fell silent. And what happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in Silverwood Grill's history. Jessica stood over Clint's table, tapping her pen against her order pad, her patience wearing thin. "Sir, as I was saying, our restaurant maintains a certain standard," she said, her voice oozing forced politeness. "If you're just here to sip a house whiskey all night, perhaps the bar area would be more suitable for you." Clint remained still, his expression unreadable. He took another slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving Jessica's. Around the restaurant, a few longtime patrons shifted in their seats, recognizing the growing tension. Some of the older guests, who had been regulars at Silverwood Grill for years, knew exactly who Clint was. Yet they chose to stay quiet, watching the scene unfold. Miguel, the young busboy, clenched his fists. He wanted to say something, to warn Jessica of the grave mistake she was making, but one sharp glance from Clint stopped him. There was something about Clint's demeanor calm, controlled, like a man who had faced 1,000 battles and won them all. Jessica, oblivious to the growing unease around her, let out a dramatic sigh. "Sir, I don't want to be rude," but Clint finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Then don't." Jessica blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Clint leaned back slightly, setting his glass down with deliberate care. "You don't want to be rude," he repeated. "Yet, here we are." There was something about Clint's demeanor calm, controlled, like a man who had faced 1,000 battles and won them all. Jessica, oblivious to the growing unease around her, let out a dramatic sigh. "Sir, I don't want to be rude," but Clint finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Then don't." Jessica blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Excuse me?" Clint leaned back slightly, setting his glass down with deliberate care. "You don't want to be rude," he repeated. "Yet, here we are." A few nearby diners let out hushed chuckles. Jessica's face flushed, but she quickly composed herself. "Sir, I'm simply trying to maintain the level of exclusivity our guests expect. We cater to a clientele that values fine dining. You understand, right?" Clint nodded slowly. "I understand perfectly." For a brief second, Jessica thought she had won. She straightened her posture, flashing a triumphant smile. "Great. So, if you'd like, I can arrange a seat for you at the bar." But Clint wasn't finished. "I understand," he said, his voice taking on a sharper edge, "that you assume a man's worth based on what he wears. I understand that you believe luxury is defined by appearance rather than character. And I understand that, right now, you have no idea who you're talking to." The air in the restaurant grew thick with silence. Miguel's eyes widened. A few guests leaned in closer, sensing something big was about to happen. Jessica's confidence faltered for the first time. "Sir, tell me something," Clint interrupted, tilting his head slightly. "Do you know who owns this place?" Jessica's mouth opened slightly, then closed. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Well, the owner is some investment group, I believe," she said hastily, trying to regain control. "Why does that matter?" Clint smiled a slow, knowing smile. "Because, young lady, I am that investment group." The words landed like a thunderclap. Miguel nearly dropped the tray he was holding. A ripple of gasps spread through the restaurant. Even the maitre d', who had been standing a few feet away, visibly stiffened. Jessica, however, looked like she had been struck by lightning. "What?" Clint reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. "Jerry," he said, his voice as casual as if he were ordering another drink. "Bring me the ownership papers. Now." He set the phone down and folded his hands on the table, waiting. Jessica's entire demeanor shifted. She swallowed hard, looking around as if searching for a way out. The realization was dawning on her in waves. She hadn't just insulted a customer. She had insulted Clint Eastwood, the owner, a Hollywood legend. Miguel's lips curled into a smirk. Now, this was going to be interesting. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Every eye in Silverwood Grill was locked on Clint Eastwood, the unassuming man in a gray polo who had just dropped the biggest revelation of the night. Jessica, the arrogant waitress who had tried to humiliate him, now stood frozen in place, her confidence crumbling. Miguel, the young busboy, watched with barely contained excitement. He had grown up watching Clint's films with his father, admiring the way he carried himself on and off the screen. And now he was witnessing a moment straight out of a movie, except this time it was real. Moments later, the restaurant's accountant, Jerry, arrived with a black leather portfolio. He handed it to Clint with a nod of quiet respect, then stepped back, watching the scene unfold. Clint casually flipped it open, pulled out a set of documents, and placed them on the table in front of him. "These," he said, tapping the papers, "are the ownership documents for this restaurant. My restaurant." Jessica took an involuntary step back, her face drained of color. I didn't know," she stammered. Clint picked up his whiskey glass, swirling the liquid before taking a slow sip. He set it down gently and met her gaze with the same steady look that had made him a legend. "You didn't bother to know." A hush fell over the restaurant. Guests who had once ignored Clint or looked at him with mild curiosity now stared in stunned silence. A few of the older patrons nodded knowingly. This was classic Eastwood. Jessica swallowed hard. "Mr. Eastwood, tell me something," Clint interrupted, his voice calm but commanding. "What exactly do you think makes a restaurant like this successful?" Jessica hesitated. "Well, the exclusivity? The prestige?" Clint smirked. "Wrong." The word cut through the air like a bullet. Jessica flinched. "It's the people," Clint continued, leaning forward slightly. "Not just the rich ones. Not just the ones who wear expensive suits and flash their wealth. It's the families who come here for a special occasion. The regulars who've dined here for years. The busboys who work twice as hard for half the recognition. It's the staff who know that real service isn't about arrogance, it's about respect." Miguel's chest swelled with pride. Clint had noticed him. Jessica, on the other hand, looked like she wanted to disappear. Clint gestured to Miguel. "This young man right here, he knew who I was. Not because of social media, not because of gossip. He recognized me because he grew up watching my movies with his father. And you? You are too busy judging people by their clothes to recognize the most important thing in this business: character." Jessica's hands trembled as she clutched her notepad. I didn't mean to know," Clint said simply. "You meant every word. You meant it when you looked down on me. You meant it when you talked to Miguel like he wasn't worth your time. And you meant it when you decided that a man in casual clothes didn't belong in his own restaurant." A heavy pause. Jessica bit her lip, eyes darting around the restaurant. She knew there was no way out of this. Finally, Clint leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Now the question is, what happens next?" Jessica's throat went dry. "Am I fired?" Clint studied her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he shook his head. "No." A murmur spread through the room. Even Jessica looked confused. "You see, Jessica," Clint continued, "this restaurant stands for something more than just luxury. It stands for second chances." Jessica's eyes widened. Clint turned to Miguel. "How would you like to start training as a waiter?" Miguel's jaw dropped. Me? Clint nodded. You understand what this place is really about. That's the kind of person I want representing my restaurant. Miguel's face lit up with gratitude. I'd be honored, sir. Clint turned back to Jessica. As for you, you have a choice. You can leave right now, find another job somewhere else. Or you can stay, learn from the people you look down on, and figure out what real hospitality means. The decision is yours. Jessica swallowed, her pride warring with the realization that she had just been handed an opportunity she didn't deserve. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and nodded. I'd like to stay and learn. Clint's signature smirk returned. Good choice. The restaurant erupted into quiet applause. The tension that had filled the room minutes ago now melted into something else: respect. Not just for Clint Eastwood, but for the lesson he had just taught everyone in that dining hall. As the evening continued, guests whispered among themselves about what they had just witnessed. Some even put away their phones, realizing that no viral moment could capture the weight of what had happened. And from his usual corner table, Clint Eastwood simply raised his glass, took another sip of whiskey, and let the lesson sink in. Days turned into weeks, and the lesson Clint Eastwood had delivered that night continued to ripple through Silverwood Grill. What had started as an embarrassing moment for Jessica had now become a defining point in her career and in the restaurant's culture. From that night on, things changed. Jessica, once known for her arrogance and judgmental attitude, had become the most eager student in the restaurant. Under the watchful eye of Miguel, now officially training as a waiter, she learned the value of patience, humility, and respect. At first, it wasn't easy. Her instincts still pushed her to favor the high-paying clientele, to cater to the influencers and the elites. But every time she started slipping back into old habits, Miguel was there to remind her. Remember what Mr. Eastwood said, he'd whisper. It's about the people. Jessica listened. She paid attention to the elderly couple who dined every Friday night, learning that their first date had been at this very restaurant decades ago. She spoke with the single father bringing his daughter in for her birthday, realizing that sometimes a kind word from the staff could mean more than the most expensive dish on the menu. And most of all, she observed Clint. The legendary actor continued to show up every Friday, ordering the same whiskey, sitting at the same corner table. No matter how busy the restaurant was, he always took time to acknowledge Miguel's progress, nod at Jessica's efforts, and subtly reinforce the new culture he had set in motion. One evening, a month after the infamous confrontation, Clint arrived as usual, but something was different. This time, when he walked in, Jessica wasn't just standing at a distance, waiting for him to sit. She approached his table herself, her expression calm, but filled with genuine respect. Mr. Eastwood, she said, placing a perfectly poured whiskey in front of him. Your usual. Clint glanced at the glass, then up at Jessica, his weathered features unreadable. Did Miguel train you on this? He asked. Jessica smiled slightly. He did. Turns out, there's a lot more to good service than just memorizing a menu. Clint nodded approvingly. You're learning. Jessica hesitated for a moment before speaking again. I just wanted to say, thank you. You didn't have to give me a second chance. Most people wouldn't have. Clint took a slow sip of his drink, then set the glass down with a knowing look. Most people aren't me. Jessica let out a small laugh, the tension finally lifting. She had come full circle. Across the room, Miguel watched with a proud smile. The restaurant had changed, but so had its people. And Silverwood Grill? It was thriving. News of Clint's ownership had spread, but not in the way anyone had expected. The restaurant hadn't become a hotspot for celebrities or influencers looking for an exclusive experience. Instead, It had become known as the place where respect mattered more than status. Regulars returned. Newcomers felt welcomed. And the staff? They worked with a renewed sense of purpose. Because at the end of the day, Clint Eastwood hadn't just bought a restaurant, he had restored its soul. As the night went on, Clint sat in his usual spot, watching the restaurant buzz with life. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to smile. Some stories become legends. Some moments define character. And some lessons last a lifetime. Because real class, it isn't about wealth. It isn't about fame. It's about how you treat people whether the cameras are rolling or not. And Clint Eastwood had just reminded the world of that once again. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more. What's a moment in your life where you learned a lesson the hard way? Share it in the comments below.